Welcome on into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time for another Mock Draft Wednesday. And today, trying to do a little bit of a quicker video because I know some of the stuff coming out has been lengthier. So, want to make this a little more accessible, easier to get through. And what I really want to explore, what we want to explore a lot of the time, is some of the most recent things that we're hearing, ears to the ground. And since I'm not an insider, I don't have inside sources. I shouldn't even say I don't have great ones because I don't have inside sources. But we do know several people around the industry who do have inside sources, who hear things, and they release stuff from time to time. And in recent weeks, we've seen quite a bit get released. Mostly what I'm talking about and what I'm going to use to help formulate this draft is Kyle Yates, Dane Brugler, and Daniel Jeremiah's most recent mock drafts. Kyle Yates just came out the other day, and we see what's similar between their drafts and what's different. Now, it's important to understand at this time of the year, a lot of the stuff that these guys are getting is from scouts. Okay, ownership is really all eyes on free agency, and until then, that's where ownership's going to be focused, and then they're going to come in and get their little grimy hands on everything and make everything messy again. After free agency is kind of not done with, but after free agency's is past a couple, that first week or two of free agency is when they'll start to turn their eyes to the draft. In the meantime, we get these little good bits of information from these guys. We get leaks every now and then, and a lot of the information right now is quite reliable. It's good stuff. It's not tainted. It's not misdirections. It's not smoke for this or that reason, because once again, that's kind of when the ownership gets involved. A lot of the stuff's pretty good stuff coming directly from the source, and we'll get another big, boom of information in just a couple of weeks at the end of the month from Indianapolis, from the NFL Combine. There's where a lot of, ears are open as they hear people in passing, and they're sitting a couple of rows back and hearing agents talk to one another, and all this good stuff of information will be coming out, and these are all good sources of information, and I want to act upon those. And some of the recent things that I want to act upon in this draft is just that we're hearing more and more that, the interest at the top end of the draft in the quarterbacks just really might not be there. Maybe there will be some sort of falling of quarterbacks in this draft. Also hearing, maybe there's a quarterback or two that could make it into the back end of this draft, and most likely we're going to see more quarterbacks taken in the second and third round, maybe just the third round, whatever the case may be, than we've seen taken in the first round this year. I have come up with this draft. This is very much not a what I would do draft as much as trying to, once again, just explore based on things that we're hearing, how this draft might kind of break down. So I had to put a good amount of effort into finding out what was the commonalities and the differences between, once again, the most recent drafts from Kyle Yates, Dane Brugler, Daniel Jeremiah in this, and focusing on some of those bits of information that I just talked about. And so the first thing was, we've already heard this from Tennessee, that, hey, pick number one is available. They're listening. And I think, okay, if we're not high up on the quarterback, then I'm thinking, Tennessee, Cleveland, New York Giants here are not really interested at quarterback so much as they're interested in taking the best player available in the draft. So kind of don't really have the New York Giants thinking about moving up. They're going to be willing to, maybe they've gone a different route already, but they'll be willing here to go a different plan, maybe go with one of those day 2, day 3 guys, maybe go with one of those guys at the end of the first round, that type of path. Just basically, though, not thinking it's worth taking a quarterback here in the top 3. Could be willing to move back and then trade and then, grab a quarterback there. That's always possible. But then I'm thinking, okay, so who wants to come up? And, it's going to be expensive. Even if it's not for a quarterback, it's still going to be expensive. And I would say there's only 2 guys that you can convince yourself, and I don't even necessarily agree that maybe either one of them is truly generational here, in Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter, in terms of convincing yourself to move up for. And once again, you don't want to give up too much, and ultimately, the reason that you're willing to spend so much to move up to get a quarterback is because your organization isn't there, and usually you're moving up as another team that's pretty close by, and you're still having to spend a lot. So, and that's because you need to jumpstart your organization. Well, now we're looking at okay, these teams aren't moving up for a quarterback. They're moving up for a piece, and they're not even complete teams yet. So you cannot give up the farm to move up to picks 1, to pick one here for Tennessee. So, like, what are the options? Who's talking to Tennessee? And I said, maybe Carolina can convince themselves of wanting to come up here for Abdul Carter. And I look at it and, what's a fair trade here? Nothing crazy. Pick 8, pick 74, a future first, and a future third for this. So you're going to have to give up a third, a future third, and a future first to move up to the first round pick to get Abdul Carter. I just don't really think that the value's there. Like I said, you could probably convince yourself of that, but it's pretty hard. So now I'm like, okay, if it's going to be that expensive for pick 8, let's look closer. And I said, Jacksonville could convince themselves. What is it going to cost Jacksonville? And this is a lot more palatable. So I ended up doing it. To move up from 5 to 1, we're going to give up pick 36. So yeah, that costs a lot. But we're going to get a second in return for our future first here. So we're just going to swap a future first for a second. All we're doing is giving up pick 36 ultimately and just dropping back in value to move up here this year. It's palatable. Tennessee, going to get more draft capital to work with now. And since we're not going for quarterback, first of all, that first round, we're probably thinking quarterback next year, Arch Manning or something like that seems to be what we're thinking. So now we've got 2 first rounders to work with that. It works in a lot of ways. And so then we're going to have Jacksonville coming up for Travis Hunter. As for Cleveland, I'm not going to do a trade. I'm not going to look into getting rid of Myles Garrett for them. That may or may not happen. We don't want to get into too many hypotheticals because that may or may not happen. And it may or may not happen before the draft even happens. So we're just going to stick with it. Either way, we need to maybe prepare for a life possibly without him anyways. Abdul Carter, you can't go wrong. We'll take him as one of the top players of the draft. New York Giants are going to end up going with Mason Graham. Obviously, Tedderell McMillan could make a lot of sense, but we are seeing with some of the most recent mock drafts, once again, who have them heavily influencing this, Tedderell McMillan not necessarily viewed as a top 10 guy, more like a top 15 guy in some of the mock drafts coming out from these guys. And I don't have him as a top 10 guy myself. I have him as my 11th ranked prospect. So definitely not a guarantee to be going up this high in the draft. Offensive line, defensive line still needs for New York. Cornerback, Will Johnson, the other cornerback, you think that could be going up here with the New York Giants. Another guy who is viewed more like a top 15 prospect. It's just very differing opinions on him coming out of the league, is what we're hearing from multiple sources at this point in time, is that people aren't all in agreement on him. So maybe the New York Giants are really, really high on him. We don't know for sure, but we do know that Mason Graham still viewed pretty positively. I will say there is some murmuring that I'm hearing where maybe not great things for Mason Graham in terms of this guaranteed top 5, top 10 pick. Then we're going to see Will Campbell here going in this version of the draft to New England. Obviously, there's other routes that they could go, Tedderell, McMillan, blah, 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 but trying to keep this kind of true to some of those mock drafts that we saw, and then we saw Tennessee fall backwards, and here's one that I don't agree with at all, and a lot of people that I pay attention to don't agree with, but this still seems to be general consensus in terms of the people who are locked in and have inside sources, is that Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, who we'll see going in a little bit. Top 10 guys, I don't have them. That's not where I have them. But nonetheless, we're going to have them going here. So I don't love the pick here for Tennessee. I think he should go later than that. But nonetheless, high upside kind of prospect pick here. And there you go, Tennessee. End up getting your edge rusher, moving back, getting some sources. I do end up liking their draft overall, though, so we'll show you. There's a second round to this. In part, that second round might end up being in the comments. We'll see how long this goes. So Las Vegas, I am going to end up going Tedderell McMillan here. I think he just makes a lot of sense for him. It's a little bit higher than some of those drafts, 2 of the 3, I think, but otherwise just kind of made sense for the purposes of this. So Tedderell McMillan to Las Vegas, I like that just fine if they're not going quarterback, which is what I decided to do. But eventually here somebody's got to take Cam Ward, and so we're going to have the Jets taking Cam Ward, and we'll see Shedeur Sanders start to fall because, now Has New Orleans moved on from Derek Carr? Are they interested in Shedeur Sanders? Would Indianapolis be interested in Shedeur Sanders? Who knows? So in this situation, we'll see Carolina also go edge rusher. Just talked about him. I don't agree with this. I'm not as high up on Mykel Williams. More of a late first, early second, I believe, draft grade on him. But regardless, we'll see him go. And so this is going to start to push some of those names that I like at edge rusher down a little bit on the board. And New Orleans is going to go with Will Johnson. Just because teams are not all in agreement on Will Johnson doesn't mean that some of them don't love him and think that he's a top 5 type of prospect, just like some analysts think so. So New Orleans could be one of those teams that really likes him. Who knows? We'll probably never know until draft day which teams do or do not like him, and we'll just see exactly how much they do or do not like him based on exactly where he ends up. But nonetheless, should be a top 15 guy at the end of the day. We'll get him here at 9. Brings us on to Chicago. Maybe he'll be a top 20 guy. I don't know. But Chicago up onto the clock here and up on the board, and we are going to be open to a trade. So this is something I think I've done. Miami's and San Francisco, both teams are really looking for offensive line here potentially. And if you want your target, there's 2 good targets available right now along the offensive line that fit schematically for San Francisco and for Miami, and that's going to be Armand Membou and Kelvin Banks Jr. are going to be the schematic fits that could be taken around this area of the draft. And if there's one of them that you favor more as Miami, you're probably going to want to jump San Francisco, and I think Chicago should be open to trading back, improving their capital. We're going to have them open to it, and I think it's going to end up working pretty nicely for them in this draft, so all the more reason that they should be open to it. So Miami comes up here, and the value is going to be pick 1398. It's not going to be anything too crazy, and I had 151, but apparently it's 150. I don't know. I just wrote these numbers down not long ago, and that's the second number that's different than what I wrote down. So apparently they changed something with the numbering here as of very recently on this PFF board. But regardless, one digit difference won't make a difference. So 1398, 150, I think will get us 10 from Chicago, and Miami going to come up here, and I'm going to have them going with Calvin Banks Jr. based on who was higher in some of those boards. And a reason why we could see Miami maybe not trade up is because, San Francisco would be sitting here going, oh, boo-hoo, we have to take Armand Membou. How terrible is that? And be just as happy with that as they would have been with Calvin Banks, even if they might have preferred Calvin Banks a little bit. So there's a reason why maybe you don't trade up, but here we did. Ashton Jeanty going to go to Dallas. I don't think I've done this, but a lot of people do it. It's very common. It makes a lot of sense for the value of running back, for the need of Dallas, etc. I'm going to bring us on to pick 13 with Chicago. And here's where Chicago's now planning on taking a draft pick. But the reason that we've been listening to offers is that we have our minds on someone who we think is going to be able to go a little bit. We'll be able to get a little bit lower in the draft here, just looking at how we expect things to go. There's only maybe 2 teams that we're a little bit concerned will take them, but we get a really good offer here from Denver, getting aggressive, going for tight end here. We'll just spoil that. So we'll only have to give up. We'll be able to improve pick 98 all the way up to 52 to move back 7 spots here. We'll end up taking that. Denver's probably been talking to a few of these teams, but I just ended up having them not really listen, saying, no, sorry, we don't want to move back. And so Denver gets a little bit desperate here, maybe ahead of Indianapolis, and just make sure that trade goes through by giving Chicago enough value, whatever that may end up truly being. And they're going to get Tyler Warren here. Makes a lot of sense for Denver, I think. And Indianapolis might be a little bit upset about that, but they're going to get Mike Green, who we are seeing in some of these instances being higher up on boards than James Pearce. James Pearce seems to be somebody who with a fair bit of variance we're seeing go at the back end of the first here in some of these drafts that are being done by people who have their ears to the ground once again. So we'll follow through with that. Going to go Mike Green ahead of James Pearce in this mock draft. I don't have it ranked like that, but I don't have it too far off either, so that's perfectly fine in my eyes. And then Atlanta is going to take a guy who I don't agree with this. Sorry, Atlanta Falcons fan. I think I'll get back for you a little bit later in the draft, maybe, in terms of making you happy again. I don't know. But going to end up drafting Shemar Stewart. It just makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. But also, as a Packers fan, I would feel similar here if I was a Falcons fan to how I felt as a Packers fan when they took Lucas Van Ness with pick 12 or whatever. It was just I'd be happy with them in the second round, but don't like that in the first round. That's kind of how I feel about Shemar Stewart. Don't really like him in the first round, but it seems to be something that is going to most likely happen. So we got to do it when we're trying to predict what will happen in the draft. And then Arizona had a little bit of an interesting board here, so I ended up going Walter Nolen for him, gives them potentially some pass rush from the interior of the defensive line as he hopefully develops that portion of the game, and he'll also just be a great asset along the defensive line anyways. Cincinnati going to pick up James Pearce. There's not really too many ways that you shake things up in the offseason where Cincinnati does not need an edge rusher, whether it be because they do retain Trey Hendrickson and they get rid of Sam Hubbard, or because they get rid of Trey Hendrickson and still probably cut Sam Hubbard anyways. So even if they keep Sam Hubbard, one way or the other, almost certainly seems like James Pearce would be a great pickup here for Cincinnati. And then Seattle on the clock at pick 18, and they're going to feel comfortable moving back here as they get an offer from Baltimore. So you look at, who would teams be willing to move up for? Malaki Starks is a guy who, some of these guys, they've got Malaki Starks really high up on their boards. And one of the mock drafts, he's going at pick 7. Now, I'm not willing to go there because the last time that we saw a safety go in the top 10, I believe, if I recall, was 1994. So, that's a little rich for me to predict. But I do think that some teams could value him very highly. So we're looking for a trade here. And a team that has a need there potentially, depends on how they feel and depends on what they do in free agency, with a lot of capital, is the Baltimore Ravens. So this is actually not going to cost them too crazy. They're going to do $27.91 and a future fifth rounder there for pick 18. No, future fourth. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong. There we go. That makes more sense. So, and a future fourth rounder here in order to get pick 18 from Seattle. Not crazy expensive. Seattle also just, they're about to take a position that maybe they would like to get a little bit more capital before they draft that position. And so they're just going to move back with that in mind. And so Baltimore does come up here for Malaki Starks, as I talked about. And then we're going to see Jihad Campbell seems like there's a pretty high chance that he'll go in the first round, so we'll make that happen here. Makes a lot of sense to pair up with Tampa Bay, Chicago on the board, and their plan comes together. They were, even willing to take Tyler Booker at pick 10. I've done that, seen that in some of these mocks, but at the end of the day, I do have a second round draft grade on him, and so I could see, maybe they'll feel a little bit comfortable waiting, but he's a nice match fit for them schematically and everything, so that works out nicely. They get a guy who apparently coming with a bunch of leadership types of qualities from the college ranks. And then Pittsburgh is going to come up here and pick up Shedeur Sanders. Oops, we don't need a C in that one. Shedeur Sanders here to Pittsburgh. I've done that in mock or two recently, so I don't want to go too much into detail there, but I think that he fits is complementary to what the defense does with this team in terms of his willingness to not turn the ball over, not make those big mistakes. I think that that's highly valued within this organization, and so it could make sense at pick 21 for Shedeur Sanders to Pittsburgh if he's still available. Maybe he'll go in the first, 5 picks, 2 picks even. Who knows? We'll get hopefully more accurate information on that kind of stuff as time goes along. But like I said, recently, it seems like we could be seeing these guys fall a little bit. So Colston Loveland to Chargers. I don't think we have to talk about that. Green Bay going to take Jahdae Barron. So when we look at the cornerback position and where they're going in some of these mock drafts for these guys, we are seeing Benjamin Morrison go at the very tail end of the first round or not in the first round at all. Injury issues there could very well be the reason for it. That's why I have a second grade on him. If it wasn't for injury, he would be like a top 10 guy for me. I really love the film on him. And then Sivan Ravel is another guy who has an injury that's going to push him back in the draft. And so Jahdae Barron's a guy who, in some of these mock drafts too, we're seeing much, much higher up. This time he does slip, just kind of how things worked out in this mock draft. But Green Bay does run quite a bit of zone, should be a good fit for them. It's a bit of an upgrade rather than a need, and I don't know if they view it as needing the upgrade they have stuck with. They really like Nixon, who they have in their slot, but Jahdae Barron is versatile. They could say, we're fine with him out on the perimeter, and he can come in case of injuries or whatnot, and just be a flexible piece for us. Whatever the case may be, they may or may not be interested in Jahdae Barron is what I'm saying, but he is a fit in some ways, at least schematically. He is a fit for Green Bay Packers. And so that's the route that I end up going here as a guy who I view as potentially like a top 10, even pick in this draft. Maybe Green Bay could say, well, at this point, even if we weren't the highest on him, we do, he is next up on our draft board. And that's going to bring us on, highest up, we'll say, for the cornerbacks. Brings us to Minnesota, who is going to be willing to move back, I think. You look at their draft capital, and we're going to do that yet again. And if we're one of those teams at the top of day 2, and we have these quarterback needs, we might be fighting with each other even a little bit. But New York's going to get aggressive in this case because I think that they're the team that could like Jackson Dart the most. So that's kind of why I have them doing this. I like the pairing, so it's going to be picks 24 and 97. So we're not exactly getting more capital, just better capital in this year's draft with this trade back. But and the future 5th, as I was seeing before, from the New York Giants. Throw that in to maybe get over the top, make this thing happen. And the New York Giants are going to take Jackson Dart, as I was alluding to. Once again, I just think could really be the apple of their eyes. Or maybe he's the second apple of the eye. Maybe they would take Cam Ward at pick 3 if he's available there. But if he's not available, maybe Jackson Dart's their backup plan. Houston, going to go with Emeka Egbuka. I just like him a little bit more than Luther Burden. And I think you're seeing that on some boards and not on other boards. But the possibility there, so that's just the route I went here. Los Angeles Rams going to get Josh Simmons. They're quite possibly going to be in need of a tackle, so that would make sense. And then Donovan Jackson is a guy who I don't really have a first-round draft grade on, but you are seeing in multiples of these guys' drafts him going somewhere in the first round. And so Seattle fell back. They got a little bit more capital, and they're going to help their interior, their offensive line there with Donovan Jackson. And I know he's listed as a tackle. He played guard most of his career. He started the year as a guard, but when Josh Simmons went down, they needed help at tackle, and Donovan Jackson was the guy to turn out. And, Seattle, Abe Lucas struggles to stay healthy, so it could be another situation where Donovan Jackson could have to kick out to tackle, and we've seen him do that successfully before now for Seattle, so it could make a lot of sense for them in terms of liking him. And then I think Detroit Lions, I think if Gray Zabel is available, is a guy who they could very, very much be thinking that they'll take. But we're having him fall maybe a little bit more than I have him fall in some of my mocks because he doesn't always go in the first round for some of these guys' mock drafts. Sometimes he will fall into the second round, and I have a first to second round draft grade on him myself, so it won't be surprising to see him go behind some of these names on draft day if that's what we see, even though I do like him better than some of these names. That's just the reality of the matter, is that he's not some sort of locked-in top 20 kind of guy or anything like that, despite having such a great Senior Bowl. And then Washington, going to get Luther Burden, available here still. They need help at wide receiver. Nice match there for them. Buffalo at pick 30. Kenneth Grant, usually not available here, but we are seeing him be a little bit of a later pick in some of these mock drafts with, once again, some of those names like Mykel Williams, Jalen Walker going, Donovan Jackson, Tyler Booker, Jihad Campbell. Those names start to add up, and then guys like Kenneth Grant end up getting pushed backwards here a little ways. Even Colston Loveland, somebody who I don't necessarily always guarantee is like a top 25 guy. Just pushing these names backwards. Kansas City up onto the clock next, up on the board next. Now, Kansas City might not find tackle to be a need for them. I keep picking the interior offensive line when I want tackles. But if they do, they'd be very happy to see Josh Connerly here. Now, they've invested in it, but we've seen them in the past. They're in their, they're a very aggressive organization, and when they need something, they're willing to go out and get it, and they're willing to sit guys. They're willing to say, well, we screwed up there. That didn't work out. We got to fix it when things aren't working correctly. And you saw a lot of the reason that they lost the Super Bowl was their offensive line. That finally came crashing against a much better defensive line. So now we know what we got to do. We got to protect Patrick a little bit better. So it wouldn't be surprising if they do end up going tackle here. But also, maybe they'll have faith in Kingsley Suamata's development. He should not have been going in there in year one, and that showed. But do they have time to wait for development? I don't know when a guy like Josh Connerly is available to you at pick 31. And so some of these teams, I think, have been getting calls from teams like potentially Las Vegas, Cleveland, Tennessee. All of them could be calling up, at least feeling things out. There could be a bidding war going on. But also, I only can have one team win if there is a bidding war even going on. I can only have one team get up here to pick 32. I do have Philadelphia Eagles being open to trading back here, if the price is right, of course. But out of those teams, I figure Las Vegas and Tennessee, they've got new regimes in there, so those two are the most likely to remain patient, to not be in some sort of rush to get a new quarterback, which left Cleveland as the odd man out. So we are going to have Cleveland just move up just to make sure nobody else jumps them, because once again, I mean, the phones could be ringing from other teams. But this is just going to cost us pick 967, is it? For a future third. Yes. So there we go. We're going to get a future third back from Philadelphia. Going to give up pick 67, and everybody will be happy. So that's at the beginning of the third round. So it's just kind of like a third round swap up. And with that, we will see Cleveland come up for, I don't know. I don't know which quarterback they want to come up for. I'm just going to have them go Dillon, Gabriel. Could be Jalen Milroe. Could be Will Howard. Could be, I guess, probably not Kyle McCord, but he's my boy. Could be Tyler Shook. Could be Riley Leonard or Quinn Ewers, I suppose. So who knows for sure. I'm just going to have him go Dillon Gabriel. Next up on my board. I do want to run through the early portion of the second round. I did end up just going through the second round here. So Philadelphia at pick 33 moved down. Going to get Derek Harmon along that interior defensive line. One of several routes that they could go, but I think that works nicely. Minnesota, remember, they fell back. Going to end up getting Maxwell Harrison. I have talked about him potentially going in the first round, and in Kyle Yates' most recent draft, he did end up going in the mid 20s. I don't know. Maybe it was them that drafted him at pick 24 even. But he ended up going in the 20s and would be a good schematic fit for Minnesota as well. And once again, when we see some of these guys falling due to injury, that could make sense that a guy like him, then the road to the first round to high second round is all the easier than for Maxwell Harrison. Matthew Golden's still available. A lot of people think could be a first rounder. Doesn't seem like he's a guaranteed first rounder based on some of these other boards, though. On Kyle Gates, Dan Brugler, Daniel Jeremiah's most recent mock drafts. To be fair, I don't know if he had declared for the NFL draft yet when at least one of those mock drafts came out, but nonetheless, Tennessee gets to capitalize on some guys falling here. They're going to get Matthew Golden, Benjamin Morrison, and edge rusher Jalen Walker. Walker. Now, when I look at this, and if I'm Tennessee in this situation, I'm preparing for the potential of this situation happening, or I guess we can make this trade before day one, and I'm practicing from pick 5 here. I look at this and I say, I could have had Tataroa McMillan and, name your edge rusher, Nick Sawyer, Donovan, Ezeiruaku, Nick Scorton here instead of Matthew Golden and Benjamin Morrison or any, cornerback. But also, I could say, okay, so I definitely feel comfortable with the cornerback selections there. So I don't need to take Will Johnson or maybe Jahdae Barron if we were thinking that that's a possible way that we could go. And I think, the edge rushers, I think, are closer in value to a Jalen Walker, even better, than the wide receiver situation here, Tataroa McMillan and Matthew Golden. Maybe you don't think like that's the case, but that is something that, that's the reason that you do these mock drafts in the organization. So just something I wanted to kind of just quick walkthrough look at. So yeah, Chicago gets Donovan, Ezeiruaku, Omarion, Hampton, and they're also going to get Azareye'h Thomas. Azareye'h Thomas. I can never say it right the first time. I have to get it right in my head first. Azareye'h is apparently how that's pronounced, Thomas. So I think Chicago really ends up getting an overall nice mock draft there with the guard in the first round, Donovan, Omarion. And you also look at like Cam Scadaboo is still available here. So this is another case where you look at taking Omarion Hampton here and what you might have been able to get at other positions of need, and maybe it would have made sense to go the other route. Either way, I like it. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to slowly here go through the picks from the second round, because I kept recording, I kept talking about these players, but I did not want this video to be 40 plus minutes long. I wanted it to be 30, 35, even 25 maybe minutes long. So in interest of keeping it a little bit shorter, I'm just going to go through this, and if you are interested in what I have to say about the pick, feel free to leave a comment, and I can talk about the pick a little bit more, or just leave a comment about the pick, regardless, if you don't care what I have to say about it. But there you go, so you could have paused it at any point and looked at those, and we'll just end the mock draft at wherever I ended it, wherever I really only needed to talk about, like up until Tennessee's draft picks, or maybe Chicago's is probably about where I ended this. So thank you very much for tuning on in. I hope you enjoyed, and yeah, peace out. There should be something in the comments maybe relevant to the total draft haul in this class, in this draft.